The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to acknowledge that while the Prime Minister has spoken today on a very important crisis, the Prime Minister has not shown leadership on this matter for over a month. I want to begin my comments by acknowledging the fact that it's inspiring to see the youth rising, to see people of all walks of life who are standing up for human rights, who are standing up for climate justice. But I also want to acknowledge the feelings of helplessness and uncertainty that many farmers, local producers, business folks are feeling right now. I know there's a lot of workers that are now not being able to go to work. There's a lot of people that are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to make ends meet because of the impacts. I'm thinking about all these people right now, all Canadians. But I'm thinking about the people at the blockade who are standing up because they are so frustrated. They are so angry, and they're right to be angry. See, the context of what's going on, something the Prime Minister alluded to, is a deep frustration. It's historic, absolutely. The injustice, the bitter and horrible injustice faced by the first people of this land, if you have any compassion in your heart, would result in some frustration, some anger. This is a serious crisis that we're faced with. It's not, sadly, what the Prime Minister referred to it as, quote, an infrastructure disruption. So Canadians are expecting us all to show some leadership. They're also expecting the Prime Minister to show leadership. But sadly, the reality is the Prime Minister has let a lot of those people down. There's been centuries of broken promises to Indigenous people. And those broken promises aren't just broken words, but have resulted in massive injustice, have resulted in massive inequality, and have resulted in the deaths of Indigenous people. Indigenous people have been denied basic human rights. Now, the Prime Minister promised to be different, but he broke those promises, and he didn't show to be very different. Let's look at his record. The Prime Minister will talk about, and the Liberal government will talk about the record, but let's look at the record right now. What is going on in our country? We've got a Human Rights Tribunal decision that found that the government didn't just underfund or discriminate Indigenous kids, but they did so recklessly, willfully, purposefully. On top of that, to add insult to injury, this government is taking those kids to court and not even being clear about how many millions of dollars are spending fighting these First Nation kids in court. Not only in child welfare has this Prime Minister and this Liberal government let down First Nations, Inuit and Métis when it comes to the funding of education for First Nations, when it comes to the underfunding of programs. Something as simple as a program to allow women to rightfully reclaim status, that program has been underfunded. There's been massive inconsistencies with what the Prime Minister says and then what the Prime Minister does. We're in the year 2020. I can accept no excuse that the Liberal government, coming off of a 5-year majority, can ensure that every single Indigenous community in this country has clean drinking water. There is no excuse. With the technology and the wealth of our country, there is no excuse why clean drinking water as a right could not be assured. See, on top of that, when a young activist raised concerns about clean drinking water in her community at a private fundraiser, the Prime Minister mocks that young person in front of his wealthy donors. That's the response of this Prime Minister. And that's a part of why this crisis is where it is right now. The Prime Minister said that he knew better than elders, and that what young Indigenous people really needed was just a place to store their paddles and their canoes. That does not show a respect of the seriousness and the gravity of the problems that colonialism has left on the first people of this land. And now speaking about the current issue. The Wet'suwet'en chiefs, nearly more than a month ago, made a request for the federal government to play a role. They specifically asked for the Prime Minister, they specifically asked for the federal government to play a role in resolving this conflict. And we asked the question, the Democrats asked the question to this government weeks ago. At the time, that question was laughed off. At the time, the Prime Minister said it was not his problem. He said, quote, entirely under provincial jurisdiction. Well, I'm glad to see the Prime Minister understands now that a nation-to-nation relationship means that all levels of government must play a role. And that means the Prime Minister must play a role. It's encouraging, Madam Speaker, to see that the Prime Minister is not calling for police to be sent in. We've seen the consequences of that type of response, and we do not want to go there. But it's troubling, Madam Speaker, it's troubling that it's taken so long for the Prime Minister to realize that there is a role for him to play and for the federal government to play. Now, the fix or the solution to all of this, it's going to require hard work. It's going to require that we respect the principles of a nation-to-nation relationship. And that means having dialogue, having conversations. And that means the Prime Minister and the federal government have to play a role. It means we need to find a peaceful way forward. It means we need to find a way that respects human rights, freedom of press, and most of all, the fundamental rights of Indigenous people. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission laid out a path forward. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People lays a course forward. But the TRC's path forward are calls to action, not calls to empty words. It's time for this government to back up those words. It's time for the Prime Minister to back up the words with real action. This is our chance to do better. Not to just say better, but to actually do better. Now, if the Prime Minister is ready to move forward in a path of justice and fairness, then he can count on the New Democrats to work together to delivering real solutions that see a path forward for justice and fairness, and then see a path forward out of this crisis. Thank you very much, President.